com, and we are so glad to see you out there as always, and hope you'll stay tuned for the next hour. We're going to be here for the next hour. We can't go anywhere. Jan has me chained down to this chair, so if I get up and move, the studio collapses. I'm holding up the whole building here. But we're here, and hope you will stay tuned. And we're going to cover some things nobody else is covering, as always. And I think you will find some of it very dramatic, and we'll try to prick your interest a little bit with some of the things we'll be saying here today. I want to stay on the topic we were talking about last week. We got into a conversation as relates to the assassination of JFK, and since we're that's going to be on the table for a while because they are now going through the documents that have just not been released, and we still won't have all the documents once these documents have dropped and they put into public domain. We still won't have all the documents because there are some documents in different places that are scattered around, and these agencies. Some of the agencies that were culpable in that event, some of it is sheer negligence. Some of it was really a direct culpability in the event, and there's a lot to be said about it, and something lot to be hidden. It wasn't all negligence. Some of it was, in fact, some of the planning that was going on, and so they are not interested in coming forth, even though the president has made an order to release all the files that are now still being held in secret, so to speak. We have a secret government anyway, and so here's the government being secret. That's one thing too. I want to add is that the secret government. We keep talking about the shadowy government and the deep state, and we don't realize when we're talking about it that the deep state part of it is not hidden. Part of the deep state is the elected officers that we're putting into government, but they are not. The deep state there is the masking that goes on with the people that's standing in front of us. And when they're lying, that's when they're lying to us, which is pretty much when they open their mouths. That's deep state too, because what what they're putting in front of you is not what they have in back of you. I saw this one. That reminds me. I saw this one editorial cartoon where they had this wolf below the podium, and he had a flag, like uh, one of these little things you wave, a fan. He had a fan, and the fan had a sheep on the fan, and he was holding the fan up where Pearson could see it. And there was a wolf down there underneath the podium speaking, but they thought this was the sheep talking. Here's a wolf down there talking. And you can tell the trouble that's going to be caused because these sheep are listening to they thought they listened to another sheep. Here's a wolf down there talking. You know what that's leading to. And so a lot of it is the deep state. We imagine it to be some shadow, people wearing trench coats and sunglasses and have a hat on, and part of their identity is hidden and all of that, and they're just kind of in the shadow parts of the government. Some of it is not shadowy. Some of it's right in the open. But if you're not capable of looking to see what is there, and you don't have the tools to actually get behind the masking that goes on, because a lot of masking goes on in all the governments. If people could understand the government revealed and naked and presented as it is before the public, you would have revolution all over the world. And they have to keep some of it from the public because the public, if they only knew, they'd be horrified. So when I say deep state, I'm not saying that it's just the people that you don't see. It is a lot of other things that are going on too. And a lot of it is like your elected officials that give cover for it. And I see it operating, every day. Okay, let me say this and I get to my topic because I do want to cover some things today on the conversation that we started last week. Uh, I did an article today on Facebook. I hope you'll read it. I'm taking issue. I'm pretty much taking on issue with almost all the commentators out there because they tend to. I'm talking about these conservative commentators more than anyone else because I don't expect too much out of the left and the commentators on the left because I expect them to be disrespectful, derisive, and dismissal of the documents and all of that. I don't expect them to do any better than what they're doing. I mean that's the history of that of the left in this country, uh, talking out of both sides of their mouth and things of that sort. That's kind of like par for the course for them. But I would expect a little bit more. I don't know what's based on. I expect a little bit more because they've been disappointing too, but they're not quite as extreme in it as the left is. But they're pretty extreme too. And I did a post today. I hope you'll read it. I did a another take on Marver versus Madison. Everybody says that if you are in this area, you definitely will have to study that case. But not all of them that study it will come away with what I'll be saying about it and what I said about it today on the post. And I noticed when it's talked about by Mark Levine and Sean Hannity, but Mark Levine more than the others because Mark Levine does a little bit more of his grounding in the Constitution, and he is now bragging about being one of the first ones, if not the only one, that's in the public limelight with the kind of audience, the kind of following that he has on his program. He talks about he's one of the first ones to talk about the way you curb the authority of the court is the Congress can abolish the courts, the inferior courts, which is of course true, and it's not a new idea. But I don't I but he's right in saying I don't hear anybody else saying that. But he's right that the inferior courts created by the not created by the Constitution, created by the by the legislative branch of government, which is given the authority by the Constitution to create the inferior courts. And because have created the inferior courts, they can then abolish those courts because they are the creators of it, and they can therefore abolish it. You can't abolish, by the way, the Constitution of the United States, which these judges think they can do. But that's a point that got to be made. Article 3, Section 2 is very clear that we have one Supreme Court, and then we have the legislative branch of government, because we can't foresee into the future of the necessaries that will be there in the judicial stream that we need to have in order to be those persons that will do the judicial work of the country. And that is to be seen because we are now founding a nation and we don't yet know all of the particulars that involves along that line. And so they gave them some wiggle room to create additional courts based upon need. So the court is uh, so that the legislative branch of government is licensed to be able to create the inferior, what they call, and it said in the document, the inferior courts. And I would say this about that as I on the QT and running, if it is an inferior court, I can tell you they have no business talking about the president of the United States obeying. This really slays me. The president will he obey the court? I mean, this is so. I was writing about that today. I had to calm myself down because when I deal with this nonsense, and I think about just the amount of time you involved in classroom kind of stuff, and it just makes you mad. I don't think that people understood that even at that level. I don't think they even understood some of the babbling that goes on. You could be surprised about the amount of babbling that goes on because this person said this and it tumbled down. That person now saying it and it tumbles down. Then you're in the classroom and you're hearing all this tumbling. And I was thinking about that when I was how ridiculous it is in terms of judicial review. And my take on it, and I wrote about it in the Facebook post today, and nobody's going to say anything about it. I have to tell you, I don't think anybody's qualified to say anything about it. And if they think they're qualified, they should come out. They should come out here and do the impossible. They should come out here and do the impossible. They should come out here and challenge what I wrote. I wrote it out in their face. And these are challenges that I'm making to these constitutional scholars. I'm challenging you to come out here and make the counterpoint. I'd like to see what you say about that article today. And I was saying that in the Marbury versus Madison case, Marbury was going to make sure that I mean they didn't deliver some of the as Adams was leaving out. You know, he was chomping at the bits because Adams did not really pretend he was going to lose because we had a secession from the greatest of the presidents, George Washington, where they were trying to goad him into running for a third term and just staying in there and never stepping down. He would have to have done in office. They want him to do in office what Roosevelt did, just stay in there until you just fall over at your desk. Well, they knew that was the all state. But George Washington was the all state of his day, and they knew they were in good hands with George Washington because George Washington, to his great surprise and his greatness, not to his surprise, but to the surprise of the world, was that his greatness was in his disavowal of the pursuit of power just for power's sake. George Washington would get the work done, and once he did the work, he was George. Every time he finished a task he had set out to do, once he had accomplished the task, George Washington was ready to go home. And last we did some taping this weekend, and John was reading some of the person that served that I shouldn't say served. That's a misnomer. The people that have been up there in Washington all these years, they were talking to people 30 and 35, 38 years, 40. They won't go home.
And the Dingle family being in power for 90 years. I mean, this is ridiculous. John Dingle. I mean, and his legacy, John Senior, Junior, now Sandy, John Junior's wife, 90 years from 1933 to 2025.
Yeah, and so that's a kingship, but it's in terms of a serial kingship. This one, all the same family.
Kings would have successors, and queens and stuff coming out of the same family. So
we have got to understand what's happening in this country that we're losing because we're not fighting. We're not willing to fight for it. And I see that in these commentators. That's why I'm taking them on in public, trying to give them some backbone. The backbone connected to the hip bone. All these bones connected. They need to get some backbone. And then where the backbone is below, you might be able to locate it. It's below the shoulder bone. And they need to get some of that because these persons are quislings to me. And they want to talk about, it's just quizzling stuff. I'm going to criticize them publicly and dare them to come out and make a counterclaim because this stuff is killing the country. And I'm not just out here emoting over these things. I'm trying to show people what the dogma that's put in place by the framers requires us to do today. They pass down to their posterity an agenda, and they can't be here to exercise and execute the agenda at this point. Obviously, they had their day and they did what they could do to make sure there was an agenda to be passed down. But it's up to each generation to hold on to it and to continue to do that work, which is to understand the legacy, first of all, and then to continue to recondition it and reinstitute it as intended by the framers. Don't be doing all the alteration stuff.
Okay, I just looked this up. 2026, the United States will be 250 years. The Dingle family has been in power 36% of the entire run of the United States.
Boy, that's too much, folks. That's too much, John. We got to look. We can't have that. We have to have people that go to Washington to do some work. There's some problems that you have identified that you want to work on. Now, once you've done the work you went to Washington to do, go home because you're not the all in all. And there are some people that are qualified to pick up the baton where you left off and pick it up and carry it forward as you are supposed to be doing in your tenure in that position. But they act like they're the only ones that can do it. That's my criticism. My criticism last week and week before last about Donald Trump. Some people writing on Facebook and saying Georgia had his word there for a minute. They thought I crossed over. No, the only time I'm crossover is when I can't get out of that box that put you in. That's my crossing over. Before that, there's no crossing over. I'm always gonna be on the side where the framers are, and the only crossing over you're gonna see me doing is a crossing over in from one phase of life to another phase of life, because death is a phase of life also, because life sustains life through death. And so you go read it. Anyway, you could take my word for that. Life is circular, and so the transition that you make is that there's another face of it in terms of you are sustaining life by by feeding other life forms. That's why I like that one guy that said the other day, couple of this one guy that's a astrophysicist said he's not going to be cremated because he's been enjoying the smorgasbord of living on the earth, and when he dies, he's not going to deny all the other life forms that will feed upon his body and so on and so forth, and deny them the opportunity to treat him as a smorgasbord in another transition of that cycle of life. The circle of life. Yeah, that's the idea. You had it, Elton John. You did it, and you're right. Hope you understood all of what you were talking about. But no, I'm talking about we have got to preserve some things here, and the framers have done they did an incredible job, and we've got to teach a greater appreciation of the job they did in these schools, so the person will understand, will have some historic memory, and will understand what was in fact passed down to the posterity of the framers, and what we need to therefore be the custodians of the day, and teach that to our children, so they will also cherish it and pass it down to their children, children all the way down, and you never forget. And that is a holocaust of memory for you to forget and fail to do your part, because you have to continue this. This cannot be okay. We're now in 2025. That was way back. This was trying to convince us of way back when they did this. That was a long time ago. I want to. You're trying to hear a politician saying that's ancient history. I want to smack them. I'm not going to smack anybody, but that's almost like you want to smack somebody, because you cannot. I mean, if you don't have the traditions, what are traditions anyway? The tradition's not just yesterday. That's part of it. It continues. But if you can maintain this tradition here, you're really doing something, because they established something very new. They didn't arrive there initially in 1787. They tried some things prior to that, and then to their great glory, when it didn't work, they were able to then find some way of doing what they had in mind to do. They knew power had to be limited, but they had not understood how to do it initially until they tried it. And then sometimes when you try things, you you find out, okay, whether or not that worked. It didn't work, and so the question is now, okay, that didn't work. What now? And they had that what now moment when all those scholars met in Philadelphia in 1787. Now they say that the official meeting would have started May 25th. Okay, if they want to date it at that point, I think the 14th would be a better date, but that's neither here nor there. So let's say the 25th it starts. When they began to understand, they had to come up with something different. And that different could not be pastering over like these potholes they do in the city of Flint, but to do something different in terms of going down a different road, but to accomplish the ends that the other document was put in place there, the Articles of Confederation put in place in 1781, to do something different with that without repeating it, because there were flaws there that could not be corrected, and they then decided that they had to go in a different way. But the idea of limiting power and restricting it and restraining people in power, that was as real as it can be. Limit the amount of years they a term years. Let the voters decide. And the idea was that they would eventually make the right decision. You get in there, you're doing bad governance. The people will then recognize that and turn you out, and that'll be enough to keep the people who are in power restrained. And it would be for people that go into power for the right reasons, but not for the people that go in there that are insane. And we have a lot of people that have gone in there that were insane. I'm not buying no that acting power tends to corrupt. Power doesn't tend to do anything. Power is abstract. What the intention is in human nature, and human nature corrupts. And that's what restraint has to be, to understand that the fallacy is people. That's what the framers view, by the way, was that the framers view was that the corruption is in the human makeup. That's what James Madison is talking about in Ferris Paper 51. That's the conversation going on there, because he was saying that if men were angels, you would not need laws. And if government was made up of angels, you would not need a constitution. But you can see we need laws. You don't need more and more laws, but you need some laws, basically, to keep people off each other, to make sure that the sovereignty of every individual is in fact respected by those. If they were not restrained, were not respected, because some are bigger than others, and some have become bullets, and some become the bullet. They're bullied by others, and things like that. In a way, that's the framers figured it out, and I give them a lot of credit. They had to do a lot of thinking in that room, and somebody should read these papers that they put out about that meeting. Somebody should read. In grad school, you have to read. They have you. They require you to read Madison's notes, and that's a good thing because this is a on the job, day to day, writing down what occurred, who said what, and it's really quite interesting to see how well Madison took the notes. You can pretty much put yourself there in those seats, like you're sitting next to this person talking. Now this other person's talking, and you can kind of like, it's like you're listening in on the thinking as if you were there, and I can appreciate it because I can see that we were talking about somebody above our pay grade. Quite frankly, I don't think any of us on that level today. I don't think you can get 55 people anywhere given from the top universities all over the world and bring them into a room. First of all, I got to stop them from fighting each other, because each one going to try to show that he's more knowledgeable than the other. So you have to first of all get all these persons with these D's and these BSs and these MAs and stuff like that, and get them and check the egos at the door. That's the first problem you have to deal with. Egos, that because everybody's learned it, and that's one thing I noticed too. You we give people paper because of what they have learned, then there's a little arrogance that is attached to it, because the idea is that you have this and that person doesn't have it. And I used to think that was really some big deal until I began to realize that the first man who had a degree, the first man to pass out a degree, did not have one of his own. You go back in time, and then when the degree is first off thought up as giving somebody something to hold in their hand, as what the learning was about, that person did not have a degree. And some of the great minds in history, Jesus, uh, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, anybody ever call them doctor anything? And they didn't. None of them had degrees. Socrates didn't have a degree. What degree did Plato? What degree did the person who wrote the Republic? What degree do you think that Plato had? Didn't have a degree. This idea of having a degree is somebody that decided, just like they do everything else, they could commercialize it and make something monetarily out of that which was taking place in anyway. They just got in front of the learning and attached some paper to it. And then before you know it, there's a college being created and a school that's set up, and there's some people in front of the room that are teaching and things like that. And at the end of the process, and they determine how many years it will take to get through the process, and there's enough time for the person to build up a little bit of bank account and get a house and so on, and maybe get a buggy out in the front yard. Of course, today that times have changed, and you kind of up the ante a little bit today. But that's the idea of where the colleges came from. The colleges came from these communities that were created, that were learned, and were to be established out of the uh, process that had been created by some person who was flawed and wanted to make a dollar out of that which was created. And I don't, and there's a place for it, but I think we have to understand the grounding point out of which it was in fact created. And we understand that you don't brag about it. I have a PhD, but you would never hear me talking about doctor this and doctor that, because I live if people don't recognize the scholarship that I have, why do you need to go out there and tell them about it? Because if it's not clear, readily apparent, then what can I say to convince them anyway? If I can't convince them by what I am writing and what I'm saying, if I can't convince them by uh, being studious enough to be able to make the claim of the scholarship, then the paper doesn't even matter. Why talk about the paper? Talk about let the scholarship speak. And that's why I challenge these constitutional scholars out here, because they're not on my level. They can they can say what they have to say. I'm gonna say what I have to say, and let them challenge it. I wrote today on about they've been coming about Marver versus Madison. Fine. Read my comments and ask yourself, what have you said along the line of what I said? And which one has precedence over the other? They all right about Marver versus Madison. None of them made the claim that I made today on Facebook. And none of them held a scholarship to challenge what I wrote on Facebook. That's not bragging. That's what I said. And I want you to read it and then see who has ever said what I said today. Okay, so I have a lot, but don't get me wrong. The paper is important because there are some doors that you go through because you can show them the paperwork, the evidence that you did something, and that paper distinguishes you from those who did not do that on that level. But let's be honest here. The scholarship comes before the paper. And if you don't have the scholarship, then the paper does not really matter of any consequence, because at some point you got to produce. I used to tell my students that when they were up there cutting up and not doing what they should be doing, I just tell them that, look, you're gonna have to at some point in time, you can do all this acting up and all this touting that you're doing, but at some point you're gonna have to perform, and the world's not gonna take your excuses that you had a lot of bad days in the classroom, didn't feel like doing anything. They're not that doesn't fly. And at some point, you're going to have to go out there and make it happen in your life because nobody can do that work for you. I can't do it. I would will it for you if I could, but that work is something you have to do. Okay, I came here to the studio to talk about something very different. I came here to talk about because I'm doing a series now up until the end of this month. I'm going to be dealing with different aspects of the JFK event because I think there's a line of demarcation in this country between what happened prior to the assassination of John F. Kennedy, who was the fourth president that was assassinated in this country. But this assassination was more current, with a lot of history having passed over by the time we got to 1963, and it is more consequential because it has had a lasting, reverberating impact because so many things happen as a result of it. And what I'm going to be doing today for the remainder of this time period is talking about how other things were happening around that time that interface with the assassination of John F. Kennedy. And one of the things that happened as a result of it was an assassination that happened 2 years later, but the die was cast in 1963, and that's the assassination of Malcolm X, El Hajj Malik El Shabazz, as they were calling once he had taken the Hajj in 1964. And I wrote about this a a few days ago, and I was making the statement here that the assassination of Malcolm X would have the ground for it would have started around 1962. That would have been the year also of the Bay of Pigs invasion. You see, I was trying to tie in what else is happening. The Bay of Pigs invasion occurred that year. So that's a part of that which led to Dallas. In 1962, in Los Angeles, California, there was an event that put Malcolm X on the road to what will occur to him, what will happen to him on February 21st, 1965, the date in which Malcolm X was assassinated. But what put him on the road to that was what happened out in Los Angeles, because in Los Angeles, there was an incident that occurred between the police and the Nation of Islam. That's a group that Malcolm X and Elijah Muhammad had in a partnership. I don't think that's the right word to say partnership. Elijah Muhammad was the head of that movement, the head of the Nation of Islam. But Malcolm X was his greatest student, and without the two of them, that movement could never have gotten off the ground because each one of them did things that would have nurtured the organization, and each had something that other could use to, in fact, aggrandize the uh, position that each of them had. Malcolm X had a speaking ability and a certain persona about him that attracted a lot of people. Where Elijah Muhammad had the plan, and that plan comes out of a conglomeration of a lot of others that had gone on before him. One of whom was Marcus Garvey. Malcolm's father was a Garveyite, so he had some of that Garveyite as well. But the plan was really the plan that Elijah Muhammad implemented through some other person that influenced him. But he couldn't get the plan off the ground because he didn't have that Aaron who was a spokesman, as Moses had, for example. You have to have somebody. You have to understand your limitations, and then you have to get people that can do the things you can't do. But you can have the plan, but you have to have someone that helps with their skill to implement the plan that you have. And they did that from the 30s up until around they got this Malcolm Little in jail, and a lot of things happened there. And he's now communicating with Elijah Muhammad from that in a cell, and Elijah Muhammad is writing him. He's writing Elijah Muhammad, and two of them get on the same page. And a lot of it, I don't have time to deal with all of it. Just to say that Elijah Muhammad had instilled in him when he was in prison with this fantasy that if you captured, I've taught in the prison, so I know how it is behind those walls. Uh, they've come in the prison. They realized that the answer they thought they had when out here, and the mom was telling them do this, do that, and they didn't want to do it, and they thought they could defy their mom, and they could defy their parents and their relatives and the family of doing things that unless they wanted to do it, and they get caught, and they get by getting captured. Uh, Part of the learning was you were not as smart as you thought you were. Now they're looking for answers because the answer they thought they had, if they had those answers, would not be behind those bars. So Malcolm was caught. It was like that learning for him. He became the real believer in what he's being taught, and he really thought that everything that had changed his life. He thought that he would take that and then spread it. When he got out, he was on fire because he saw the change in his own life. Because out there he was Satan out there prior to getting caught, big red, and now what he had been told uh, was transformative because it was telling him reformulating his religious ideas, and it made him come out of the situation he was in into another situation. He saw he saw the transformative effect of the teaching, and he wanted to spread that when he got out of the prison in 1957. I think I'm right here, 1957, and he came out burning, you know, with passion to do that work and so on. Now, you have to keep in mind here, you can get in serious trouble if you do not understand and keep a handle on your role inside of an organization where you're not the top. I'm gonna use this word here, but I don't mean it in a canine way. When you're not the top dog, when you have the kind of skills that Malcolm had, and the person who taught you has the plan, but not the skills you have, you have to be very careful of how you um, go into even the expression of those skills, because the person that is the head will see that as a challenge. It's a challenge that King did not have with Ralph Abernathy, because King was not going to be outshined by those around him. Who's going to outshine him? Andy Young, Ralph Abernathy, Jesse Jackson. That's not that's no problem here. Or let's take the great Booker T. Washington and his surrogate, his secretary, who was a very smart man, Emmett Scott. The Wizard of Tuskegee had a second. All he'd tell Emmett Scott was, "Get this done, get that done," and it would be done because Emmett Scott was the secretary to the Wizard of Tuskegee. The Wizard of Tuskegee was Booker T. Washington, not George Washington Carver, Booker T. Washington, and he was the person that was the head of that school of thought on that side of the racial divide. He's on one side and Du Bois on this other side. But Emmett Scott was eminently very, very efficient. And without Scott shining as he was shining, doing the job he was doing and not coveting Washington's position, it allowed Washington to be very effective. I don't think you can talk about Booker T. Washington without talking about Emmett Scott. He never doesn't get any credit. He's the one that made Washington stand out. Because all Washington had to worry about was going out there and funding Tuskegee Institute and going off from Tuskegee and doing fundraisers, and all of the work that back at the college was being done because Emmett Scott was still in control of that, and it allowed him to soar like an eagle, and he did soar like an eagle. But Emmett Scott has been given some credit for that. Malcolm has been given some credit for what was accomplished in Nation of Islam. But here's the fallout, and people need to learn from this fallout that occurred. When they shot in 1962, there was a shoot. There was a conflict that developed in the mosque in Los Angeles, and some police officers ended up going into the mosque and they're meeting the Fruit of Islam, the soldiers of that organization, and it got out of control, and there was shooting in the mosque, and that inflamed the Muslims all over the nation. There are a few here, a few there, and a few there, but when they all congregate at the same place, it's about 15,000 of them. Now, a lot of people thought, like this guy wrote the book called Black Muslims in America. They thought that this was 15,000 here in that city, 15,000 in that city. Met in Baltimore. Look at the crowd that came there. They were just traveling with the message of the Nation of Islam would speak. They would go and be there. So they thought they were looking at all these large groups going to hear them. They didn't understand the same people going from one city to another, getting chartering buses and getting on the buses and riding. Philadelphia, be there, and Detroit. So they thought, well, they tried to add up all the numbers. It's 200. They got 200,000 people. They never had 200,000 people. Maybe at the height, at the zenith of it, 15,000 at the most. But you can get in front of a crowd, and then you are beginning to speak, and you can't help but notice the reaction the reaction that you're getting, and the reaction that Elijah Muhammad is getting. And you have to be very careful when you're the second. When you're not even number two, you're just you're a follower. Everybody's number two. But then look at the fact that the crowd is responding to you a little bit differently than they're responding to the other. Here's where the JFK thing comes in. When that shooting occurred in Los Angeles, the Muslims all over the United States were inflamed by them shooting in the mosque. And Louis Lomax had written a book called When the Word is Given. I've heard Lomax speak, and I know Lomax was one of the few persons that could hold oratorical the same candle that Malcolm X was holding, because they debated each other quite a few times. I heard the debate between Louis Lomax and Malcolm X when I was in college. I didn't understand it at that time. I was a sophomore in college at that time. I didn't understand it, but I was very much impressed with how each man, one a Christian, one a Muslim, came off and were able to hold their own on both sides of the argument that they had. Both were very articulate. Lomax was very good. Lomax wrote The Negro Revolt. It wrote a book called something about the death of a black man. That's his book about King and Malcolm X. But the book I read, the book that I'm thinking was his masterpiece. Well, none of them are scholarly written, but the one that stands out in his writing was the one about when the word is given. That's the one, by the way, that tore Malcolm and Elijah apart a little bit more too, because it put Malcolm X on the front cover of that book and put Elijah Muhammad on the back. And I don't know what role Malcolm X would have played in that. Maybe Lomax would have seen that the person that was actually the light in that organization was Malcolm X, and Elijah Muhammad was like secondary. But you cannot that does not fly in that organization because of the way it was set up. And I don't and I don't I think Malcolm X could have had something to say about being on the front cover. But sometimes you just let your ego get out of place. Then there's this other thing too that's going on in the Nation of Islam. These little tensions are now developing so that the terror that will happen in 62, there's a lot of little things going on prior to that. And one of the things was this. Go read this book by uh, his name is his let's see, the book he wrote, I'm trying to think of his name, but the book he wrote was Remembering Malcolm. Remembering Malcolm, written by the one that introduced Malcolm at the Audubon Ballroom the day that he was assassinated. You know, you're getting a little old here, Moss. And but that book is a very important book because here's what is said in that book, and that is that Malcolm X would be at the microphone saying, "The Honorable Elijah Muhammad teaches us this. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad teaches us that." And this author of that book said everybody knew on that dais that what Malcolm was saying was not true. So what was Malcolm X doing? Malcolm X was in fact moving that movement away into an area away from the quote the messenger of Islam and changing that message and then saying that Elijah Muhammad was teaching that. And that's what Benjamin Kareem is his name. Benjamin Kareem, Benjamin X. Goodman, changed his name later on to Benjamin Kareem, was saying that when he would say the Honorable Elijah Muhammad teaches us thus and so, he said that nobody on that dais knew better than Elijah Muhammad that was not true. And Elijah Muhammad saw saw it for what it was, an attempt, not even recognized by Malcolm X himself, to take over the Nation of Islam. It took me a long time to understand the dynamics that were going on here, but I had to read a number of books that had not even been published yet to get to this level here, like the 47 Rules of Power. And one of those rules of power is not to outshine the person that's over the organization. That's very dangerous. And what Malcolm X was doing in that Nation of Islam was trying to move the movement to the pace in which a younger person would want to go. But the older person, more seasoned in that, wants at a slower pace and understands it on a different level and is not willing to throw all of the baby out with the bathwater type of things. He's not willing to do that because the whole thing can come crashing down. But if you didn't help build it from the ground up and weren't there at the very beginning, you don't see that it came from nothing the way it is at that point, and you don't have an appreciation of from nothing to something a little bit more powerful at this point, because you came into it and was already beginning to be a little bit more powerful. You made it more powerful than it was, but it was not what it was when it first started out, when you could fill up you couldn't fill station wagon up with the number of members. So there's a lot of impatience. So Malcolm goes out to Los Angeles after they shot into the mosque. Malcolm X went out to Los Angeles, and the idea was the word is going to be given, and this is it. The Shan is going to hit the fan now, and Elijah Muhammad is going to turn his warriors, the fruit of Islam, loose, and they're going to retaliate against the police in Los Angeles, California. And Malcolm flew from New York, the East Coast, to Los Angeles on the West Coast with the idea they're going out there to fight. And Malcolm went out there with the idea that it may well be that he's going out there to die. And Sam Yorty, who was the mayor of Los Angeles at that time, saw that this thing was getting out of control, and he called in Chicago and told Elijah Muhammad this was becoming very incendiary and needs to call Malcolm out of there because Malcolm was stirring up the people and this could get out of control and so on. And Malcolm was out there speaking, and he could not understand how all of a sudden he's been told to calm things down. You can see you can go back and look at the tapes, the tension that he was under, because everybody was out there not expecting him. He's the man that is in front of the microphone more than anyone else in the Nation of Islam. He's more in the limelight than Elijah Muhammad was, and they thinking that Elijah's going to speak to him, and this is the word is going to be given at this point. And here, this message had been translated has been given to Malcolm, calm things down. And he already stirred them up, and they're now ready to fight. And now it's calming the people down. And that's a bad scene. Malcolm had been put into he thinks he's been put into a trick bag. And so now he's been told, calm things down, and then eventually told to leave, get out of there. You can see Malcolm X speaking, and a handkerchief of sweat all over his face, sweat over his brow. And now he's trying to calm that situation down. And he said things like this: "You don't like people shooting at the mosque, do you? You getting them hollering in? No." He's trying to get that anger out. And they're out there hollering, and then he says this after they get through hollering back at the stage and saying how upset they were. He said, and then he says this: "The power brokers will be very glad. They better be very glad that Elijah Muhammad has control over his followers, and that they're going to remain cool, calm, and collected." And the people in the audience that have come out there to fight, and they can't believe they're up there saying that. And you're going to read Hakim Jamal's book, From the Dead Level, Malcolm X and Me, written by Malcolm X's cousin. Go read that book. They couldn't understand. Later on, they talk about, what was that about, brother? I mean, it's when Malcolm was now on his last days, and they want to know, what was that about? They couldn't understand what had happened. So they went out there to fight, and here you calming things down. They wanted to understand it better from now that Malcolm could talk about it, and he said, yeah, it was a bad scene, but he was under orders to calm that situation down. That's what he did, but he didn't like it. And when he came from Los Angeles, going by way of Chicago, and there are rumors in Chicago about what's going on because people leaving Temple number 2. Detroit was number 1, number 2 is Chicago. The name according to when the temple was set up. So the first temple of Islam was in Detroit, and then Chicago was number 2, and then you got number 3 and number 4. You go up to number 11. That'd be the mosque at Farrakhan in Boston. Number 7 was the mosque in New York. Mosque number 7 that Malcolm B put over later on. But they could not believe they were not being told, let's go. They were ready to fight. Well, what if Malcolm didn't like being put in that position that he was put in, because the way they saw it was that Malcolm X was calming them down. They didn't see that they didn't understand that this man was under control of the person who headed the organization. They just saw that Malcolm X was the one who was telling them be cool, calm, and collected. Malcolm came back from Los Angeles, went by way of Chicago back to New York, and stopped off there. And he was talking, mumbling. You want to know what he's mumbling about and how that was being played out? Go read the book by this great book by Taylor Branch. Taylor Branch has written 4 outstanding volumes, each one 700 and some odd pages. The first one, he wrote extensive about the civil rights movement. The first one was 1954 to 1963, called Pardon the Waters. The second volume was called Pillars of Fire. You're going to be there for a while reading these books. It's in Pillars of Fire where he starts off with this break that's getting ready to happen between Malcolm X and Elijah Muhammad. Because when Malcolm came out of Los Angeles by way going through Chicago and back to New York, Malcolm came back mumbling on his breath. And in the Nation of Islam, that's considered planting seeds. You don't say things that would contravene the leadership. And Malcolm was talking because Malcolm's upset to be made to look like that. And he began to talk about, he began to see the leader of the Nation of Islam in a different way. And tensions began to develop. And he's saying things that he would not normally have said. But the scales from Malcolm X's eyes have fallen away from his eyes. And he looks at the leader of the Nation of Islam in a different way than he looked at him prior to that. And now he's beginning to look at a lot of other things that's been said. His belief has been changed. His feelings about the leader has also been altered, and some of the things that were of disrepair in the leader's life, the leader, like those young. I'm just going to be raw about it. He had those secretaries working for him, and one after the other got pregnant. And Malcolm X, who's from the street, you can say it to a lot of people. Person, look here. The name is George Moss. You can claim you're gonna tell me a person that had Malcolm's background didn't put 2 and 2 together. See all those girls who were working as a secretary, one of those getting pregnant and being sent away, and all the other, and you can't make a connection that those persons are being impregnated by the same person, and you don't understand that, and you got street creds, and you don't understand that. Go look at the book When the Word is Given that came out in 1963, where Dick Gregory was walking down the street with Malcolm X, and Gregory asked Malcolm X, "What are you, his pimp?" And that so upset Malcolm X, according to the book, because now Malcolm realizes that there's the talk of what's happening with those teenage girls is now out. Because here's Gregory saying, "What are you, his pimp?" Why didn't you ask Malcolm X that? Because Malcolm was sending those secretaries into Chicago and was the secretary of those for the message of Islam. And he claims that he did not. His religious fervor was so great that he didn't put 2 and 2 together. You have to put 2 and 2 together. If you see a wolf and a fox in the hen house and the eggs keep missing, the hen's not eating the eggs. You put 2 and 2 together, and then you got a fox in there. That's where the problem is. And so these girls, one after the other, getting pregnant. Malcolm X would say he did not. He had to refute his own intelligence. He wasn't refuting his own intelligence. He was denying what was right in front of his eyes. But then after after Los Angeles, he began to come to grips with it. That's what it was. He began to recognize it for what it was. He saw it already. He heard the rumors, and that friction is going to build and build and build. And now you have the assassination of John F. Kennedy, November the 22nd, 1963, and the Nation of Islam have been given orders, basically to Malcolm X, do not make a comment about the assassination of the president because people love this man. And to make a comment will only inflame the country against the Muslims if you make a comment out of season. And because they were not sad about it, because they were looking at it in a different way, given their religious outlook, they were not saddened by it. So what Elijah Muhammad was doing was saying, just be quiet, don't say anything. And under different circumstances, Malcolm would have been quiet. But here's what, see, fate takes over. Elijah Muhammad was supposed to have spoken at Manhattan Center, but because he had asthma, and many times he have a speaking engagement, have to bow out the last minute. They had paid the money from Manhattan Garden, and they did not want to lose the money. So Malcolm X spoke in Elijah Muhammad's place, but they'd been given orders not to say anything about the assassination. And then in the audience, he didn't say anything in the speech. I'm giving the scholars something to think about here with this point. It looks like Malcolm, by not saying anything in the speech, is willing to be compliant with the orders that have been set down for him and all the other Muslims not to say anything. But Malcolm opens it up to questions after the speech was over, which was very unusual and very, very discombobulating, because the people on that stage could not understand how he's opening up the questions. You've given the speech. What's the questions about? And Malcolm opens it up. You have to understand the psychology that's going on here. And by opening it up, what question do you think they're going to ask with that speech being given on the 1st of December, the assassination of Kennedy, not even 2 weeks old, and you're now opening up a question? What do you think the first question is going to be about, given the state of the Muslim organization and the assassination of John F. Kennedy? The first question that was asked by a woman by the name of Helen Dudar. Now, who is Helen Dudar? Helen Dudar is the wife of Peter Goldman. Peter Goldman wrote a book on Malcolm. He had a lot of, this is a white author, had a lot of respect for Malcolm X, and wrote a very good book about it, about Malcolm X, and that book is one. I'm trying to think of the name of it, but it's well. Peter Goldman is the name. You need to read his book. It's called The Death and Life of Malcolm X. That's the name of the book, by Peter Goldman. Helen Dudar stands up and asks Malcolm X about the assassination of Malcolm X. And under normal circumstances, Malcolm X would have said what he'd been ordered to say, no comment. But Malcolm makes another statement here, which Elijah Muhammad sees it for what it is. I tell you what it was: defiance, misdirection, and defiance. Not saying anything in the speech, but opening it up so that the conversation could go on based upon him answering a question about the assassination. They're going to come in about the assassination, not in the speech. But in the question, in that, if it's raised, Malcolm X is asked that question, and therefore he's answering the question. But what he should have said, based upon the orders he'd been given, was no comment. But that's not Malcolm X. And Malcolm X said, the assassination of the assassination of John F. Kennedy is a case of chickens coming home to roost. And then he said this as well. He said, in being an old farm boy, chickens coming home to roost never made me sad. It always made me glad. And the next day, there is a New York Times front page. Because what Malcolm has done here, after that mumbling that he did, and also there are enemies inside the Nation of Islam who are seeing his energy, seeing his ambition, and want to rally around protecting the head of the Nation of Islam, and also they're cut in it because they are digging into the monetary thing in the Nation of Islam. Got a lot to lose if Elijah Muhammad is forced down and Malcolm comes up, and then this man is more of a Puritan and wants a clean house. They can't have that go on. So they have a stake in protecting the persona of the Nation of Islam's leader. But he loaded that gun up and then handed it to his enemies. And then New York Times wrote an article on the front page, Malcolm X, the assassination of John F. Kennedy, a case of chickens coming home to roost. Subtitle, it never made me sad, it always made me glad. Now, that's on the 1st of December. On the 4th of December, Elijah Muhammad calls Malcolm X to Chicago and tells him that was a bad statement you made. And then after they had talked for a while and the tension between them was such, he said, now I'm going to have to silence you for 90 days because I have to separate that comment from the Muslims. Legitimate enough. But it had not been there to be something else. Malcolm was not going to be allowed long in an organization. You can't be mumbling like he was doing and talking to different officials who he thought were talking to persons who were following him. But you know what? They were following Malcolm X as long as they thought Malcolm X was representing Elijah Muhammad. Yeah, they were Malcolm's ministers, they called it inside the Nation of Islam, but they were Malcolm's ministers as long as they heard him say, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad teaches us this, and area of the word of his mouth was the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. Yeah, that was they thought that was the backup. When they saw the other thing, though, they saw that he was out there by himself, and he loaded that gun up, and that's going to be that road he puts himself on to join John F. Kennedy, who was assassinated in November 1963. Malcolm will in fact be martyred in 65, by conditions that begin to tumble out of control and so on and so forth. You can read about it in a lot of different books. I would say the main one would be, go read the book by Peter Goldman, since I thought that book at the last minute, The Death and Life of Malcolm X, and you'll be able to put this together. Okay, we're going to continue to talk about the Kennedy documents coming out. I'll be talking next week about how the Kennedy murder would have been a combination of the CIA and Mafia link, Charles Ashman's book. Okay, until next week, I want you to follow your dream. If you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.